Hey, everybody. This is our lesson on evidences of evolution. And we have two theories of evolution that were, in the textbook. And the first one is Lamarck, and it's inheritance of acquired characteristics. So this one's where an organism will develop traits by use or disuse of a body part. And this is used parts will become stronger and larger. These are called your acquired characteristics. So acquired characteristics are traits that are developed during an offspring's lifetime. And these characteristics passed from parent to offspring? No. So, for instance, if I were to get my arm chopped off for some reason, and then I learn to adjust and live without that arm, when I give birth, that does not mean that my children will be born without one arm because I lost an arm and learned to live without it. Okay, so that's what this acquired characteristic is. And then Darwin, which was from 1831, and he, you've heard his name before, published a book called On the Origin of Species, and again, where he looked at evolution by natural selection. So of these two, Darwin is the most correct, as in his theory was accepted, and that's due to his evidence behind natural selection. Down here, you will see the Galapagos finches. And as mentioned in the previous lesson, they have different beak shapes so that they could eat different seeds, different berries, things like that, because there was so much competition over their original food source. So here in 1859 is when he published his book, and natural selection is how change happens in a population. And here is just a picture of the Galapagos Islands. So they are on the Pacific Ocean side of South America. And why were these ideal for observing evolution? So evolution is, and looking at these, they were ideal for observing evolution because you don't have to worry about, you can look at ideal conditions in terms of you don't have to worry so much about migration because they're all left on that island. You don't have to worry about human interference. You don't have to worry about all these other things that can lead to changes that would interfere with that data. So evolution is the what and natural selection is the how. So natural selection occurs when organisms with favored traits survive, reproduce, and pass on variations of those genes to the next generation. And the organisms without these are less likely to survive and reproduce. Survival of the fittest. So due to this, new generation consists mostly of offspring from parents with these variations that aid survival. So if you look at this, obviously the darker mice that blend in with the ground are less likely to be eaten by birds. So the brown ones are the ones that are more visible. They get eaten, which then means that the black ones can reproduce and create more offspring that are easier to survive than the brown. So if you look at these, you've got a dark peppered moth and a light peppered moth. And based on the tree that they are on, obviously the dark peppered moth is more adaptable to his environment. So just as a summary of Darwin's theory, all populations must adapt to survive. Natural selection is how that occurs. And the organism that best adapts to the environment will more likely be able to reproduce and pass on its DNA. So here we've got a deer, as you can tell, and we've got a smooth cactus versus a pointy cactus. And the consumer will see two different plants. One has spines like a cactus and one does not. So obviously the consumer is going to eat the plant without the spines. So the spine itself, is the one that has the survivalist characteristic, because the one without spines is damaged and the one with spines lives and reproduces. So some evidences here that validate parts of Darwin's theory are fossils. the anatomy of the fossils. So we've got analogous structures, homologous structures, vestigial structures, and embryology. And then biochemistry, which is just the DNA evidence. This was actually established after Darwin's research, but it does support what he found. So first, let's look at fossils. So this is evidence of an organism that lived a long time ago, and scientists can use this to make a timeline about life on early Earth because they can, again, test it for the amount of carbon, kind of give it a range of when it existed on Earth. Some important fossils that were found, Acanthostega, which is a four-legged animal that was found in the fossil record. So that's, looking at the oldest microfossils that we've got. And Arachnioteryx, which is the first bird found on the fossil record. And there's the fossil for that. The second part of evidence for this theory is anatomy, so how animals are built. So we look for homologous structures, analogous structures, vestigial structures, and embryos. So let's start with homologous structures. Remember that prefix means same. So these have the same structures but different functions. So for instance, we have a human arm versus a cat's front leg. They're the same structure, but they do have different functions. So here's a human arm versus a cat front leg versus a dog's, that's a horse's front leg versus a whale fin. So all of them have very similar structures in terms of bone type and the shape of the bones. But what they necessarily are used for are different. Ours are used for balance and, being able to hold things. Cats can be used for clawing and running. Horses are used for running, and then whales are used for swimming. And then we have analogous structures that are different structural makeup but have the same function. So a bird's wing versus a butterfly wing. And here are some examples of different wings, and I'm not going to try to guess what all of those are. I know that's a butterfly, and that's a bat, and that's a bird, and I'm not sure about that one. Oh, it'll tell you right there. Okay, that's why. It's a dinosaur. All right, and then vestigial structures. So remember, vestigial means they're not needed. They're just extra parts of the body. At one point in history, they were necessary, but eventually became unnecessary. So for us, wisdom teeth, because that's not, we don't have to say vestigial organs. Your, whatever that thing's called, appendix. Okay, tonsils, all of those are vestigial body parts for us. So here, this, in a whale, they actually have a little femur, which would be a leg. Well, they don't have legs, so they don't need that. Okay, so in snakes, they have a pelvis and a femur, but they don't need those because, they don't have legs, so they don't need those. So for us, we've got wisdom teeth and appendix, both unnecessary, which is why it's okay to get them taken out. They're unnecessary till they cause us pain, and then we have to get them taken out because they could kill us if, appendix, if it makes your body sick trying to fight it. And then the last one is embryology. And an embryo is the animal in the earliest stages of growth. So here you can kind of compare the shapes of embryos and what they look like in comparison. So as you could tell, like here you got a fish and a salamander. They're pretty closely, they look pretty similar. You've got a turtle and a chicken. They look pretty similar. And a rabbit and a human. They look pretty similar. So here are just some different pictures of embryos. And same kind of thing here. And the one that was, studied after Darwin's theory was biochemistry. And this is looking at DNA. So the more similar the DNA, the more ancestors organisms will have in common. And this is looking at their nitrogen-based sequence. So the more that is in common, the more related they are. So who is most common with humans in terms of DNA structure? We've got the chimpanzees, okay? All right, so that should be